Hey, Rob Berthoff here, and it's an interesting topic. I've been seeing this still surface a lot about this idea of the changes to the SDA logo, and I thought I would just put some thoughts out there about it. I thought I would thought. So the first thing that you'll know about me is I love branding. So I'm fascinated with anything around logos and brand identities, and I do believe that it's important to have consistent branding and to have some iconography and have some symbols that really encapsulate the brand. So the other thing you'll find out about me is I love a good conspiracy. Not into conspiracy theories, but I love a good conspiracy. So ultimately, when the Adventist logo was created, I was naturally intrigued, I should say, by all the conspiracy theories that were kind of going around what the symbolism actually meant. Now, the website's pretty clear that it's really around this idea of anticipation of the seventh-day Sabbath and anticipation for another Advent, which I love. But there was a lot of people started to question, right? And what's the rationale of why we have this new logo? Now, there's a misnomer here, but we'll get to that. There was this concept of like what happened to this logo, and so I was actually trying to research: was that our official logo? Did we have a logo before this new logo, which isn't new? This has been around for quite a while now. But ultimately, just like thinking through what this whole thing meant, and what happened from this, and this is why, as I'm moderating different Facebook groups and things like this, I see a lot of these questions come up. But because what happens is that people took this and then took it to the next, added the theory on top of it of that it was infiltrated and whatnot, right? So kind of piling theories on top, and then the comment sections go wild, about flames and upside down crosses and all the other things. Some people pointed out that a cross with a flame around it is very much a Catholic imagery. Other people went even further and tried to make it represent the 666 or the Eye of Satan. And okay, so look, if you know me, I'm not one that dismisses a theory immediately, right? Because I believe that in time, if you have the time, that you should investigate in each relevant theory and study to show yourself approved. We know that we should not be naive. Right? Ellen White tells us that the deceiver's chief work is at the SDA headquarters, where he tries to persuade leadership to be unfaithful to their trust. Right? So that means that it's not, it shouldn't be immediately shut down, the idea. But it's also important that we don't get pulled into sensationalism and that we don't step on a credibility landmine. Right? And this is something that I cover in detail in one of my courses called Credibility Traps. So for me, I approach each theory cautiously and ultimately just want to figure out, is there any merit to it? Now, for me, what you'll see is that also when I'm seeing this narrative carried on by respected pastors that I trust, and they're actually making some good points, right? To me, it would say, okay, this needs to be investigated further. And the first question is, well, what was our logo before? And everyone points to this one here, but that wasn't actually our logo. What I find out is that it was really the imagery that was used in the Review and Herald, the Adventist Review. So we didn't, as far as I can understand, we didn't have any official logo, quote unquote. And so then the question is, well, what was it about this iconography that we rallied around? And then for me, the thought is I kind of got curious, what was the history of this branding? So that's something I did today, was I just kind of went through the archives, and I started the very, very first volume back in 1850, and I kind of had like an interesting little thing. So I recognized that at first it was actually called the Second Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, and then the next year it dropped the second part, and it just became the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, updated the text a little bit. 5 years later, they shortened it to Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, getting a little more stylish with the way they dress up the fonts there. And it wasn't until 1960, so 10 years after they published the first issue, that any sort of iconography was used. And so we see this illustration of the Ark of the Covenant with the inscription, "And there was seen in his temple the Ark of his Testament." Now, 7 years later, 2 new symbols were added. One was the cross, and one was the crown. And so if we were actually to start and kind of keep track with this, the original iconography that was used was a cross, a crown, and the ark. And so that's just kind of keeping tabs on this. Now, if we go back to this 3 years later, they dropped all of the iconography and just started with the wording, the Advent Review and Herald of the Sabbath. So they switched up the last part. 3 years later, like again, got a little bit fancy with the typeface, just like clockwork. Another 3 years later, changed it up a little bit more. Then in 1880, they added the Bible and a lot of little embellishments to it. So now it has the Bible iconography there. 5 years later, they went kind of a retro thing. Then in 1886, the Bible got moved down and they introduced a globe and a dove. And now, why I think this is interesting is if at the time, this was essentially because this was the official magazine, quote unquote, of the Adventist Church. So I'm wondering, were there people that got all up in arms about the rays coming out of the Bible? Or why is the dove pointed down? Or why did the Bible get moved out and it's a globe now? Are we globalists instead of people based on the Bible? I could just hear these questions being asked in 1886 of, and I'm just I'm interested in kind of seeing how this thing ultimately progresses. So in 1890, the dove and the Bible got moved up behind the text. And I'll point out that ultimately this one was the longest running headers for the magazine. So we'll find out later that the three angels was actually about 6 years. But this one right here was several decades. I didn't even do the math on it, but I think it was like something around the lines of 40 years or more, that this one was the predominant, or a variation of this was the predominant header. And so again, I think it's interesting just the imagery and the symbolism used. So now we have added a book, a globe, and a dove. And so now these are the 6 different pieces of imagery that were used in the publication. 1809, they removed the word Adventist and the word Sabbath. So if ever there's a time to get upset, this would be it, right? Because we've actually removed 2 very important words. That then got reverted back in 1913. And again, they're going back to the header previously used back in 1890. Then 2 years later, they added the flame and made the Bible and the dove smaller, right? And in 1929, the Bible and the dove were gone entirely. And all we had was the globe and the flame. So interesting. Why I keep kind of pointing this out is that there could have been a big uproar or something, which is kind of on something that's essentially kind of evolutionary, so to speak. So maybe there was no intended statement by it. It was there. They switched up. It got removed. It could be preference. It could be a lot of different things, whatever the theme at the time was. And then we see this one. We now added in the 10 Commandments and Jesus coming in the clouds. And we added in, I will come again, Jesus says. Then we see, now we brought the Bible back, and we've got this one here. Now everything gets taken away, and it becomes very, very, this is 1939, very standard, very kind of corporate looking. And then it gets a little bit classy, kind of crazy again, right? Kind of fun with the banners. And then we keep that same concept with the Advent that we had right there with the Advent in the R. They kept that, but then just changed it to the Review. And they started really pushing more around the Review. Then it got reverted back. And now we're looking at the Review and Herald with those words being prominent. They start kind of phasing out the background a little bit. And then ultimately they just move to the Review and Herald. Now, if anyone that you're going to be upset about, maybe this one, it's a clover, which is a very Catholic symbol. So it's interesting that the clover got introduced with into the logo. Anyway, and now this is in the 36th volume. Okay, so it was interesting that it wasn't even volume 144, starting the first one. They waited until the 36th issue of the 144th volume in 1967 to then introduce the 3 angels in with a globe. And then they ended up moving the angels up, because if you notice, they were positioned center. Then they moved the angels up, so one angel's above. Then, this is the 6-year mark, they published an edition that has this go to all the world, but then they removed the angels. So actually this was removed, the angels were removed from this all the way back in 1973. So again, we didn't actually remove the angels in a sense recently from our logo. It was actually done in 1973. Then they added back in the word Adventist. Then they switched the font. Then they got a little more bold. 1986, right? This is kind of the Back to the Future look, right? Interesting how pop culture influences, maybe, who knows? Then how we have volume 167 in 1990. Now this one actually adds in these three little wavy lines. So this is the first time that wavy lines was added, was actually 1990. Then we see that the flames get added to this, right? And now this is the current logo that is now. So ultimately, just kind of look through, these are all the different imagery that was used throughout the history of the Adventist Review. And again, we mention this because the three angels being the kind of what we've always looked at as our logo, even though we've kind of had a lot of these different images have been used over the times. And so the new symbolism has the flame. It has the wrapping around a white space of a globe, an open Bible, and a cross. So the question is what symbolic messaging did we lose? And again, from a branding perspective, I'd give it like a 9 out of 10. I think it's a solid logo. But the symbolism that we ultimately adopted, is on the right there. The symbolism that we lost would have been the ark, the crown, the dove, and of course the three angels. And so I just want to point out, though, that the three angels are actually only used from 1967 to 1973. Not that it wasn't adopted at that point by the Adventist Church as a whole to kind of start using these three angels with a globe, but it's kind of just the point of it simply is, I wanted to kind of be clear with like ultimately the analysis on this and kind of when I'm running through it. So I started saying, okay, look, maybe it's not a big deal. But then I was trying to find some verses in the Bible, and we actually have, some talks about this idea of signs, right? In Psalms 74, we talk about the defiling and tearing down of our prophet, no longer seeing any signs. Okay, what does that mean? Is that important, right? We see here the deceiver replacing in signs for signs, Psalm 74, 3-4. So it makes me wonder, right? Are we actually no longer carrying the banner of our faith? And we can look in here. The angels have directed bearing upon the people living in the last days of earth history. They are a symbol to represent the people of God. So the three angels are important to us, and we need to be ensuring the three angels are out in the forefront because they are a representative of the people of God. As Seventh-day Adventists, we read here, we are Seventh-day Adventists, and in this name we are never to be ashamed. As a people, we should take a firm stand for truth and righteousness. We also read here that Ellen White wrote, where there's a company represented before her under the name Seventh Adventists who would advise a banner or sign which makes us distinctly a people should not be held out so strikingly. I saw some reaching their hands out to remove the banner and obscure the significance. But this banner, the distinctive banner, is to be borne through the world to the close of probation. So we are told that this banner should be that should make us a distinctive person. Okay. It was predicted that professed SDAs would give up their faith in the spirit of prophecy and would fall prey to aligning under the banner of Satan. Now, the question simply is, what's the meaning of this? What's the context of this? Right? Are we referring to a literal banner? And is that what we actually feel was taken? And some may say yes, but and maybe you look. What I didn't add to the slides is if you actually get into the second Lateran Council, there was a whole kind of, the celebration was pushed in 1990, right? The whole concept of a removal of, or a kind of a repealing of the Protestant Reformation, right? The Counter-Reformation has been incredibly effective. And I do believe that there are some influences that are out there. But the question simply is this. Is this a banner that Ellen White was talking about, or was she referring to the people? We read here that by your fruits, that you'll be known, right? So are we demonstrating the character of Christ? Are we demonstrating the three angels' messages? Are we actually just wanting a logo to do all the work for us? Or are we actually thinking about this, right? And so I believe that we must remember that this is, one, God's final church, right? We can't be saying that the SDA church is an apostasy because of a logo. Now, we can say that because of specific maybe theories. I do believe that anyone that has been indoctrinated by questions and doctrines needs to actually go back to what the Spirit of prophecy has to say. But the point simply is, we should not be ignorant of our history, but we also want to make sure we're not creating division in the church. Because by just focusing on a logo, and by the way, the irony is a lot of the conversations of the people that are coming and talking about this logo are not even doing it out of love. It's such a strong piece that I don't think they're just being so. I don't want to generalize, but the conversations I've been around with the people that are complaining about the logo are not doing it in a way of love and not demonstrating the character of Christ. So ultimately, I think we need to stay focused on surrendering further our characters to Christ, and that is the final banner will be the lives we live, not the logo on a building. Okay. So now, all that said, I ran an experiment because I'm always interested in this. Okay. So I ran an experiment. And what I wanted to do was say, look, personally, I like the old stuff better too. I'm a bit nostalgic, not going to lie. Okay, I think that the new logo is, it has, like I said, I give it a 9 out of 10. I think it's a good logo in terms of it's modern. I think it's stylish. I think it speaks pretty clearly. But when I went back and I said I want to use the old logo for some stuff that I wanted to do. And this is what I found, right? The problem with this is that, these are not high resolution, for one. And also, they don't scale very well, and et cetera, et cetera. So I thought, I'm going to hire some artists to create new Adventist logos. Now, these are people that have, there's no reason, they're not going to be thinking about adding Illuminati symbols. They're not going to be thinking about any of these kind of things. I just wanted them to what would they come back with? And I got a bunch of logos back. The one I liked the most was this one. Now, we've got the 3 lines. That was on them to represent movement. And this is kind of one that I think was interesting. The problem with this logo, with the same issue that this logo on the right here has, is that if you make it one color, like if you want to put it like an embroidery on a shirt, something like this, that's what it would look like. Okay. So the problem is that it doesn't work good as a single color. So I went back to the designers. I said, okay, now make this again, but this time do it where it can be a single color. And this is what they came back with. And I was actually pretty happy with this. I thought that it prominently displayed the 3 angels while still showing kind of the earth. There was some movement there, right? But now this is where it gets interesting. So now, I like this as a whole, but then I put on my skeptic's hat and I said, okay, what if, and again, by the way, this is child's play logo-wise compared to what our official logo is actually really professional. This is just child's play. This is just fun, right? It was an experiment. I wasn't spending tens of thousands on a logo, right? I spent, $150. Okay, so the idea is this. I went through this now and I said, okay, on the surface, I like this one, but let me now analyze it as if I wanted to pick it apart and find a conspiracy. And the first thing that I started looking at was, what if I turn it on its side, right? This ultimately becomes a crescent and a moon, which is a very pagan symbol. So I thought that was funny. I no longer can use the logo now, but I thought it was funny with the idea that sometimes you can find something in something that's not there or wasn't intended to be there. And ultimately, the question is, how much of this is unintentional, right? And how much of this is intentional? Now, I do believe, and I'm going to say it right now, I do believe that there is a significant Jesuit infiltration in our church, okay? But do I believe that the logo is the eye of Satan? I don't believe that God would allow that. And I believe that God is greater than Satan. And no matter how much influence Satan tries to put into our church, which, by the way, is the final church, okay, I believe that God would not allow for it to be completely turned into a pagan symbol. So I have to believe that the logo is something that is acceptable to God. He would not allow his final church to have a pagan brand on it. That said, as a global piece, that said, I do believe that there are a lot of doctrinal issues regionalized in pockets in the Adventist church that's faulty. There's a lot of issues that I think that the Adventist church is facing. But I guess my point is simply this. if we have to figure out what we want to be focused on and what we want to put our energy into, we have to remember that our focus needs to be on our personal banners. Gandhi said, "I like your Christ, but not your Christianity." And so this needs to be a lesson to us that our focus needs to be not on the iconography that we're using, unless it's something that's out and out pagan, okay? But instead thinking about, right, am I living the gospel? Because ultimately, the church is the people. And we're not going to bring people into the church based on what a logo looks like. We're going to bring the people in the church based on the contents, the characters of the people. And so again, I hope you had fun with this as much as I did. I have to just assume that any sort of thing is just coincidental. However, I do believe that we need to be focused on, are we teaching the right doctrines? And focused on, are we individually living the gospel? And so that's what I'll leave you with. And I just hope you have when you see this next time, I hope that you're able to maybe give some faith in somebody that thinks that the church is now in apostasy, because Ellen White's very clear that we are not to call the church Babylon, and this is God's final church. And so I can go a lot further into that, but I'll keep it here. Thanks, everyone.